On a night when a city was celebrating its hero, the celebration ended with a handgun pressed inches from a champion's face, an image that would be replayed, debated, and investigated across the country. What happened in those stunned, silent seconds raises urgent questions about power, perception, and the raw terror of being at the mercy of someone with a badge and a weapon. If you're watching, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a developing story. Terence Bud Crawford is not a stranger to headlines. He is one of boxing's most decorated fighters, a hometown son who rose from local gyms to world titles, and who returned to Omaha this week to celebrate a career-defining victory. The streets that embrace him in daylight would, hours later, witness something else entirely. A traffic stop that culminated in officers pointing firearms at Crawford and ordering him out of his vehicle. Video captured the incident. Witnesses described fear. City officials promised answers. And all of it unfolded in the small hours after a parade held in his honor. The short clip that circulated online is stark and direct. It opens on a quiet stretch of road under the sodium glow of streetlights. A car stops. An officer's voice can be heard. Hands emerge. Then a gun aimed. In the grainy angles of the footage, you can see a man, later identified as Crawford, unbuckle his seatbelt, open his door, and step out with his hands raised. The officer's weapon is pointed at him as he moves. The camera does not capture the whole exchange. It offers instead a few jagged seconds, a frozen tableau that would fuel question after question. Why were firearms drawn? And why was such force used on a man being celebrated by his home city hours earlier? According to official statements released by the Omaha Police Department, the traffic stop happened after officers pulled the vehicle over for reckless driving in the early hours following the festivities. An officer, they say, observed a firearm on the driver's side floorboard, and for the safety of all involved, officers ordered the occupants out of the car at gunpoint. The statement noted that a member of Crawford's security team was carrying a firearm legally, that Crawford was later cited for reckless driving, and that no charges were ultimately filed against him. Omaha's police chief announced an internal review into the episode. Those are the broad strokes laid out by authorities as the investigation began. But statements from witnesses paint a different, more harrowing picture. Qasim Shabazz Assad, Crawford's head of security and a passenger in the vehicle that night, told local reporters that the stop felt like a near-death experience. "I thought we were getting ready to lose our lives," he said, describing officers drawing guns and ordering everyone out. From his vantage point in the passenger seat, Assad insisted he never saw an officer look through the car to see a weapon on the floorboard, and he said the team had done nothing to warrant such extreme force. His account adds a human heartbeat to the video. The sudden shock, the breath that catches a throat, the stunned calculation that crosses a person's eyes when metal is pointed at their head. To understand why these seconds hurt, you have to go back a few hours. Earlier that day, Omaha had celebrated Crawford with a public parade and a homecoming for a man who had just accomplished something few in his sport ever do. Streets were lined with supporters. Flags and signs honored the hometown hero. Then the night grew late. Crowds dispersed. The lights went down. The same streets that had cheered him hours before became the setting for an encounter that, for all involved, would feel like a breach of trust. For a city that was brimming with pride, the image of a gun pointed at its champion felt, to critics, like a slap in the face. Or worse, an echo of deeper, long-standing tensions. Video is partial truth and potent fiction. It shows, it hides, and inflames. The seconds on the grainy clip are definitive in their terror. They are also incomplete. The footage does not clarify what preceded the stop, whether police had prior information, whether the firearm on the floorboard the officer referenced was visible from outside the car, or exactly how the officer justified the immediate decision to draw a weapon. Those gaps matter. They're the openings through which suspicion, fear, and speculation pour in. And they are the reason the city's call for an internal investigation rang so necessary and so inevitable. When a moment like this plays out, the people in the car become the primary witnesses. Crawford's head of security described a sequence from inside the vehicle. A sudden shout, the flash of steel, the order to move, the pressing flat of a weapon near a jaw. "I thought we were getting ready to lose our lives," he told reporters. He said that the officer seemed unhinged the moment they revealed the weapon, and that he and Crawford were handcuffed until officers could check identification and realize who they had stopped. That detail, being restrained and made to wait while identity is confirmed, strikes at the core of what many see as a problem, a moment where force replaces calm, where assumption overrides patience. The Omaha Police Department's explanation rests on a claim an officer observed a firearm on the floorboard. For police trained to prioritize officer safety, a visible weapon inside a vehicle is often cited as a legitimate cause to draw and point firearms until a scene is secured. The department framed its intervention as a safety protocol, a split-second judgment call under uncertain conditions. Yet for those who watch the video with the knowledge of Crawford's status, and for members of his team who maintain they were not reaching for any weapon, that justification felt threadbare. It raises crucial operational questions. Was a weapon plainly visible from outside? Was the vehicle stationary, or was it still moving? Could the officers have approached differently? These are the tactical details investigators will examine to determine whether policy was followed and whether that policy is itself adequate. Social media split along familiar lines. Those who defended police actions as necessary in a risky traffic stop, and those who saw an egregious overreaction toward a black man who had just been celebrated by his city. Headlines erupted internationally. Commentators asked how a celebrated local son, a man who had inspired young athletes, could be reduced to a frightened figure with a pistol aimed at his head in his hometown. For many, the moment was magnified into a symbol of larger, systemic issues. How force is deployed in traffic stops, how split-second decisions can have life-changing consequences, and how the optics of policing collide with the optics of public celebration. Newsrooms filled with analysis. Civil rights advocates ask for transparency. City officials promise investigations. Internal investigators and, if necessary, outside reviewers will work through a precise checklist. They will determine the exact timeline. When the vehicle was observed, why officers initiated the stop, who claimed to see the firearm and from what vantage point, how quickly officers used force, and whether Crawford or anyone else made movements that could reasonably be interpreted as threatening. They will parse radio traffic, body camera footage, if any, patrol car dashcam video, witness interviews, and the weapons chain of custody. An investigation will also examine whether officers follow departmental protocol for traffic stops and for the escalation and de-escalation of force. In short, they will reconstruct the seconds leading up to the gun being drawn, and then decide whether that reconstruction aligns with policy and with rightful practice. A closer look at training and policy. Police departments nationwide train officers to treat visible weapons as immediate threats. That policy is rooted in the stark reality that officers face real danger on the streets. Countless police training manuals instruct that if a weapon is visible and the threat is not controlled, firearms may be drawn to secure the scene. Yet other doctrine emphasizes de-escalation, verbal commands, and distance whenever feasible. Critics of the Omaha encounter will ask whether the balance tipped too swiftly toward lethal force, whether seconds of clear communication could have defused the situation, and whether officers were working off an assumption driven in part by bias. Those debates between precaution and proportionality are not merely academic. They shape the protocols that decide life or death in the field. The human cost, terror, humiliation, and dignity. Imagine having a gun pointed at your face. The immediate sensations are universal. A spike of fear, the body's involuntary reaction, a mind that jumps between compliance and frozen disbelief. For someone like Crawford, a public figure whose life is lived in public, that fear is compounded by humiliation. A man who had spent the day being lifted by his community, suddenly reduced to vulnerability in front of cameras and strangers. For a security team, the sense of helplessness, handcuffed, constrained, and waiting while questions are answered, translated into trauma. Those human experiences are real, and they complicate the sterile language of policy and procedure. How race, status, and fame complicate the optics. This incident exposes a core tension. Fame and recognition are not always a shield against police use of force. In some cases, celebrity can change the politics of a moment, prompting swift public apology, rapid media coverage, and city-level scrutiny. In other instances, fame does little to alter the immediate risk faced in a traffic stop. Yet the imagery of a black champion being held at gunpoint in his hometown enters a long national conversation about race, policing, and who is perceived as a threat. Crawford's celebrity ensured that the nation watched. It also illuminated the persistent anxieties of communities that feel overpoliced and underprotected. That duality, the simultaneous shelter and vulnerability of fame, is one reason this story resonated so widely. The narrative in the media, variation and amplification. From tabloids to established outlets, the story spread, each outlet shaping the narrative slightly differently. Some headlines emphasize the raw imagery, held at gunpoint. Others focus on context. Stopped for reckless driving. Local stations interviewed Crawford's security chief. National outlets dug into the parade that preceded the stop. Video creators and commentators on social platforms added commentary and frame. Some argue the officers acted correctly to secure the scene. Others allege improper use of force rooted in bias. The variation in reporting is a reminder that a single event can generate many truths. Eyewitness accounts, official statements, and the lived sensations of those involved. Whether or not body cameras capture the entire sequence will matter. Raw footage from body-worn cameras and dash cams can clarify vantage points and sequence. The presence of firearm on a floorboard might be clear from some angles and invisible from others. Investigators will want to release footage where possible to restore public confidence and answer questions about officer conduct. In recent years, transparency through video release has become a crucial step in investigations of police use of force, and communities often judge the thoroughness and good faith of an inquiry by how willingly departments provide that footage. For many watching, the grainy social media clip is a start. Full body camera feeds will be the next step toward understanding the totality of what occurred. There is a difference between policy failure, where officers violate explicit rules, and the fog of a split-second decision. Investigations often have to assess whether what appears in retrospect to be an overreaction was a human, instantaneous judgment made under perceived threat. If officers followed policy and drew their weapons because the fact before them suggested a firearm was present, investigators might rule the action justified, while nonetheless recommending policy updates. If, however, officers deviated from required procedure or misread the scene due to negligence or bias, the consequences could be disciplinary or criminal. The line between acceptable caution and unacceptable use of force is what the inquiry will attempt to delineate. City leaders stepped into the breach with predictable but necessary tone, acknowledgement of concern, promises of investigations, and calls for patience. Omaha's mayor publicly supported an internal review led by the police chief, framing it as a necessary step to maintain trust between law enforcement and the community. For some residents, those words offer measure of reassurance. For others, they sounded like routine politeness. The larger demand from community advocates was simple: transparency, accountability, and a public accounting of whether the officers' actions were consistent with law and policy. In a city that had celebrated one of its own, the public now sought clarity on why celebration ended with a drawn gun. From a legal perspective, two separate threads run through this case. One concerns Crawford and any potential citations. In this situation, he was cited for reckless driving but not charged with a crime related to possessing a firearm. The other thread concerns potential civil claims. If a review determines officers used excessive force or violated Crawford's rights, civil litigation could follow. High-profile stops that end in visible uses of force frequently lead to lawsuits alleging violation of constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures or claims of excessive force. Litigation is a slow channel for resolution, but it is a powerful incentive for departments to examine policy and training. On the sidewalks of Omaha, opinions varied. Some expressed trust in the police and acceptance of officer accounts, arguing that visible weapons justify defensive responses. Others, watching the video on their phones, felt a cold recognition of familiar scenes: a weapon pointed at a black body, hands raised, a humiliation repeated too often in recorded American life. A community that minutes earlier had cheered now grappled with an image that felt like a betrayal. Those contradictory responses reveal how communal memory and personal experience shape how a single image is interpreted. This encounter fits into a larger ledger of high-profile police stops that drew intense scrutiny. Across the country, videos of officers pointing guns at civilians have produced public outrage, legal action, and sometimes reform. Each case is unique in its facts, but they accumulate into a pattern that shapes policy conversations. When does officer safety override the dignity of the person stopped? Under what conditions is lethal force appropriate? How should departments weigh the trade-off between rapid neutralization of perceived threats and slower, measured de-escalation? The Crawford stop will be compared to those past cases as part of the national conversation about policing standards. The psychology of the officer and the stopped. It is worth trying, carefully and without excuse, to imagine the officer's psychological frame. On a long shift, trained to see danger and to react in the interest of survival, an officer who swivels toward a glint of metal might see a threat where a civilian sees an object. That perception can be amplified by time pressure, poor lighting, and the fear that a sudden movement could mean gunfire. Understanding that human dimension does not excuse misuse of power, but can help explain why split-second decisions sometimes escalate to cruelty or tragedy. That understanding is the basis for training reforms that attempt to reduce misinterpretation and bias in critical moments. Terence Crawford has long presented himself as a role model and community figure. An episode like this reframes his public narrative for a moment. Instead of being only a triumphant symbol, he becomes, on camera, one of countless people subjected to what feels like arbitrary coercion. There's a sting to that. For many of his fans, the incident highlighted his vulnerability and the shared vulnerability of black men in America. For Crawford personally, the incident could reshape his approach to public security, public appearances, and his relationship with his community and the police. The event will be part of his public life moving forward, a moment he and his team must manage both personally and professionally. When video circulates online, newsrooms face a test: the obligation to report quickly and the obligation to report accurately. Responsible outlets will seek confirmation, show the footage in context, and cite official statements and eyewitness accounts. They will avoid sensationalism while not minimizing the human implications. In this case, reputable outlets have published both the video and context, while many creators on social platforms have offered opinion and outrage. The balance between speed and care is essential. A rush to judgment can compound harm, but a delay in reporting can leave the narrative to rumor. The public must demand both transparency and rigor. If the investigation reveals shortcomings in communication, information of probable cause, or in de-escalation practice, there are concrete reforms departments can adopt. These may include enhanced training on recognizing when weapons are visible and when they are not, better protocols for traffic stops in high-profile situations, and reinforced emphasis on officer verbal commands and distance. Departments may also review how security details and escorts are coordinated during public events, and whether officers are briefed about major celebrations that could alter the context of a late-night stop. The goal is to reduce the odds that a routine stop becomes a moment of terror. For community members and Crawford's fans who demand answers, the pathway is clear. Request full release of any body camera and dash cam footage. Demand timely updates on the department's internal affairs process, and, if necessary, request independent review from outside agencies to ensure impartiality. Public pressure has often been the engine that turns an investigation into meaningful change. If oversight is thorough and transparent, it can restore trust. If it appears perfunctory, the damage to community confidence can last far longer than the news cycle. If you strip the episode down to a single, lingering frame, what remains is simple and brutal. A man, hands up, a gun leveled at his head. The stillness of that moment, captured and replayed, is the kind of image that imprints itself on a city's memory. It disrupts narratives of safety and celebration, and it anchors a story that will be told in different ways for years, as a cautionary tale of policing, as a reminder of celebrities' limits, and as a human moment of fear. That quiet image will be the one that calls for answers. As investigators comb through footage, witness testimony, and policy, key questions will persist. Did officers have a clear, objective reason to draw firearms? Was the weapon plainly visible and reasonably perceived as a threat? Were Crawford and his security detail cooperative and compliant? Did the stop escalate because of miscommunication or misperception? These are not rhetorical. They are the practical steps toward accountability. The answers will determine whether this was a lawful exercise of precaution or a moment that demands reform. In a city that just celebrated one of its own, a brief moment of fear became a national story. The image of a gun inches from Terence Crawford's face will not leave the public record anytime soon. It is small, intimate, and terrifying, and it asks us, the viewers, to look harder at how we constrain power and protect dignity. If this report mattered to you, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this story, demand transparency, and stay informed. We will update as official reports and footage are released. Thank you for watching.